Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Friday night preview show here on the PinkUn channels. Whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you're very welcome. Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy Davitt to dissect what was probably one of the more lively press conferences we'll have this season. We'll also be taking your comments and questions as well. So, any thoughts on what Daniel Farke has said today? We will get into that in due course, or anything on team selection or thoughts or questions ahead of tomorrow. Get them in the chat box, and we'll try and answer as many as we can in the next 45 minutes to an hour. Paddy, I mean, the only place we really can start is Daniel Farke and that press conference. It was probably a night, probably more than 10 minutes. That the answer he gave to
13, but he basically needed 3 minutes to warm up, and then he went loco.
To which was a fairly I can't even really remember the question, to be completely. I'm not sure anyone can remember the question by the end of it, but it was quite an epic rant. It was very much here's loads of stuff that's on my chest, have it. What did you make of it, first and foremost? I guess that's kind of the first question. What did you make of the way he unloaded it and the way he packaged it?
Oh, it was definitely pre-planned. Yeah, I mean, covered enough of these pressers with that man to know that very rarely does he say, when he gets into monologue territory, which is essentially what it was. He goes there armed with, maybe he doesn't know fully formed what he's going to say, but he clearly had topics that he wanted to stitch together. We've seen it many times down the years. Mine goes back to the Nelson Olive era, right back at the outset with the shirt and the name on the back instead of name on the front, or vice versa. And Josh Murphy getting thrown out of the boat, I remember that one off the top of my head as well. And then Tim Closer pulling him back in metaphorically. And there was even one last year I was trying to remember this afternoon about, was it dating Keira Knightley from Yarmouth and all that sort of carry on. So, he's got form, it's safe to say, for these long, wide-ranging. But normally it's maybe when things are going a bit more positively in terms of results and performances on the pitch. And, very forensic takedown of what he feels is a small, worth stressing, minority of maybe amongst Norwich's fan base who decided they're not having, as he felt, Lucas Rupp, the two centre-backs from last season, Gibson and Hanley, and also the GOAT, Teemu Pukki, from what they have or haven't seen this season at this level. And ultimately, I think he said in the midst of that, having listened back to it, that he wants to get in ahead of probably a tide of negativity starting to build up, which is pertinent as they're about to take on a team who, if the season is officially starting, then tomorrow Watford at home, a team who they led out of the Championship, who apart from beating Villa on the opening day haven't picked up a point. I think they haven't scored in their last 3 league games. So that is a very winnable. He's not having must win if you're Daniel Farke, but clearly it is a very winnable game, comparatively speaking, when you look at the games they've already had. Liverpool, Man City, Arsenal to a less extent, and Leicester. So you can see why he's trying to get ahead of this curve, that if they don't get the result tomorrow, heaven forbid they get beat tomorrow, then that negativity would start to slip a gear, and whatever percentage he would put it at a minute, I'm sure would start to grow. So I think essentially he's trying to be quite canny and get ahead of that and talk about something which maybe isn't there in terms of a massive issue at the minute. Yes, people have their grumbles with certain players, but it was ever thus. So I don't think that's particularly new, but it's just maybe given the degree of difficulty of what they're trying to achieve and bridge the gap as a self-funded club, even off the back of, by Norwich standards, quite a lavish transfer window. He feels that to stand any chance of doing that, it really does have to be, maybe to go back to the Josh Murphy analogy, it needs to be everybody in the same boat, all the fans, players, coaching staff, maybe even the local media as well, throw in there as well, that if there's any fractures, then they got no chance in his view. And maybe he was just reminding in his view, in his own mind, that needs to be the way it is. And hence why he was basically saying, look, just don't turn up there tomorrow with any negativity. If you see a team sheet drop an hour before and hypothetically Lucas Rupp is in there, let's not immediately, oh no, what's he doing? Why is he playing? He's not good enough. He can't hack it at this level. He says just get behind the players and because they'll need them. in that type of game tomorrow for all the reasons we've just stated. That this is Watford, it isn't Liverpool. There is a different level of expectancy around Norwich and what they can achieve tomorrow. And in that context, he wants everybody on board, and let's see what the outcome is at the end of the game. But I just think, to put the full stop on it from me, that he's anticipating a trend that might start to grow and grow and grow, and he's trying to get in ahead of that happening by just reminding everybody what Norwich are trying to do this season, how difficult that was going to be before a ball was kicked, and that remains the case. So, any small fractures at this stage in the fan base and not a sense that everybody's pulling in the same direction, he clearly feels that's weakening Norwich's chances of achieving that. So hence why we had the thick end of 13 minutes and quite a robust defence of certainly 4 or 5 players. But I guess essentially he was talking about the whole squad, because anybody who wants to dig out any of those players, the same applies.
Yeah, it did feel a bit like kind of situation management, because if Norwich get let's hope they don't, but if they do get a result that maybe isn't particularly favourable tomorrow, it will be him in the firing line, won't it? It won't be the players that he's kind of listed today. So maybe when you say about getting ahead of the curve, maybe there is an element of that. It just felt, reading between the lines, Pat, and look, we don't know particularly. I was trying to think as he was listing off, and I was thinking, have we been overly critical? And I'm not sure we have, and I'm not sure anyone, certainly that I've seen or whatever, has been. So someone's clearly got his back up, and I wonder if this was more about the effect that perhaps some of the stuff on social media is having on the players consuming it, because I think we've heard before about players after games immediately on their phones, basically assessing whether or not they've had a good performance, and that does affect and knock the confidence of certain individuals and certain players. Is this him trying to nip in the bud that very early before it gets to a lack of confidence, and say down the track maybe Norwich lose a couple more games and then it really does become turgid, doesn't it? And the mood really does shift. So is this him almost trying to, I know he said protect his players a little bit, but also kind of protect the wider situation and the implications it could have on the squad as well?
Absolutely, yeah. And social media is part and parcel. He made the point as well. They get paid very handsomely to be Premier League footballers, and criticism by definition comes with the territory, because the focus on the Premier League and all that goes with it is, well, it's global, isn't it? It's not just a Norfolk or even a UK. The Premier League is a global brand, so there's no hiding place. If they're not performing, then there'll be plenty of people wanting to tell them such, particularly with the easy accessibility that social media offers, which should be a force for good. But we don't need to have a debate, because we could have an evening's discussion about social media. And of course, last season it reached a point where publishers and football clubs and players all went quiet for that weekend period to sort of protest at some of the worst excesses of social media. So we don't need to open up that debate this afternoon. But suffice to say that if you are those players that he mentioned, they all have, off the top of my head, social media accounts. Maybe not Hanley, I don't think, but certainly the others do. And I would imagine their timelines probably have had presences of negativity. But, if I'm Lucas Rupp, I'm thinking I'm a very experienced player. Why would you even listen to it? Why would you give it any oxygen whatsoever? He's not a guy starting out in his career who doesn't understand what it's all about. Social media may be a phenomenon that came later in his career, but he's a very experienced operator, played a lot of games for a lot of clubs at the top level in the Bundesliga. So I wouldn't necessarily think him per se is too affected by social media. But, ultimately, none of us in whatever walk of life particularly want to be taking criticism. And maybe there's a drip effect, because let's be honest, with him particularly, I think there has been quite a growing sense that, as Daniel said, when the team news drops and Lucas Rupp's in there, we all go on. We're on social media anyway, because we're at a ground normally. But anybody who isn't, let me tell you, it's pretty universally on social media a very negative reaction when Lucas Rupp is in the team. So I'm sure that would feed back to him. But as I said in my first answer, I think ultimately what Daniel's trying to do is just remind everybody that Norwich, if all the cards fall for Norwich, it's still going to be a hellishly difficult task to stay in this division because of the financial disparity, what they're trying to do, the way they're trying to do it. So if you're trying to, achieve that when, there's dissension and there are elements of, in Daniel's view at least, not pulling in the same direction, then, what is a very difficult task may become an impossible task. So I think right here, right now, at this stage, before compared to the first 4 games, a more favourable, more eminently winnable few games, you could argue, that he wants to get in and just try and maybe just refocus both on the pitch and off the pitch, with supporters, with his players, with everybody around the club. Just refocus a touch going into what is a massive game, because this can be a momentum shifter. Norwich get a positive result tomorrow and a good performance into the bargain. Then suddenly, right, well, maybe we can leave a dent on this Premier League and we can be competitive in that sort of lower 6 to 8 club bracket, which is where they're competing. So I think it's maybe in his mind, he's weighed it up, calculated it, and maybe feels now on the eve of the Watford game is the perfect opportunity to just, as I say, reset the focus so that everybody, in what he will hope now off the back of what he said this afternoon, is that when that team news drops at 2 o'clock tomorrow, there'll be universal positivity, and that will then roll into 3 o'clock, the whistle goes, and Carrow Road, as he said, needs to be a fortress, because Watford will be a very difficult nut to crack.
Yeah, they absolutely will. He made a point today, didn't he, which we'll come on to later, about how difficult they are to break down, which is probably a little bit concerning given what we've seen of Norwich City from an offensive perspective. Tom has came straight in, so we'll tackle this immediately. We've kind of spoken about Lucas Rupp, but we'll open that particular box now. He said, "Hi boys, what are your thoughts on Lucas Rupp? For me, he isn't Premier League quality. It's as simple as that." I mean, we're talking about a guy who has nearly 150 appearances in the Bundesliga for several different clubs. I mean, to put that in perspective, it's kind of a similar level to what Pierre-Lace Malou has in the French division. And there was a big thing made about all the experience and quality that he was going to bring to Norwich this summer in terms of midfield. He was certainly at the start of the championship season very, very good, wasn't he? Some really good sort of opening performances in that midfield role. I didn't think he was terrible last weekend against Arsenal, not a standout by any accounts. There were a couple of individual errors that he made, particularly in the second half. But first half, he contributed to what was a fairly decent Norwich City performance. So, I mean, as Daniel Farke said, he's not a player who particularly plays sexy football, and he's not someone who you're going to pay for your ticket and you go, "Oh, I can't wait to watch Lucas Rupp today." But probably one of those players, for me at least, that if you're a player alongside him, you probably appreciate him a lot more than maybe if you're in the stands. But I do get the frustrations around Lucas Rupp. So, Pat, I'll throw that over to you. Really, Lucas Rupp, your thoughts, and I guess wider. As a wider point, the criticism that he gets, is that justified for you in terms of the level that it seems to come in from certain quarters?
Well, I think if I go back to my days supporting my team, there's always been players who are in this bracket that, fans can't quite see maybe what the manager or head coach sees in these players and why they play them week in, week out. I mean, I'll give an example. Back in the day at Cov, there was a player, Kevin Richardson, won the title with Everton. We're going a long way back now. Sorry for you younger listeners, viewers today, but you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about.
I never heard of him, no.
But he was a very steady Eddie sort of midfield type who would get it and give it, wouldn't necessarily do too much eye catching, putting the ball in the top corner or goals to his tally. But he was seen as an intrinsic part of that Coventry team at that era, and he, I mean, that was a pre-social media era, so God knows what he'd have got if he'd have been on social media back in the day. But I just think that it has been ever thus, bringing it back to Norwich City. I'm sure there's supporters who can think of similar players to the Rupps, to the Richardsons, in many teams that have gone before, who supporters, maybe not all supporters, but maybe the majority of a support base can't quite see what that player offers or what that player brings. But to bring it right back to what Daniel said about Lucas a few hours earlier, he said on the Arsenal game, actually, there was one or two sloppy pieces of play in midfield that could have led to more dangerous situations occurring. But he actually said, I remember exactly the quote, it was an Oliver Skip type performance in terms of putting out fires, the defensive protection that he offered. He said if you watch that game back carefully, Daniel said, you would have seen a very, very good performance from Lucas Rupp in the areas that he's in the team to do. And that is ultimately to try and break up play, to try and offer that protection. Now, I think we'd all accept that irrespective of the opponent they've played in these first 4 Premier League games, Norwich's midfield just hasn't looked like it's got that right balance, the sort of the defensive protection allied to be able to build a play and give Norwich that control and composure. Billy Gilmore was dipped out against Arsenal, but he's not convinced. Could you say McLean, even Lys Malou? I've seen some nice things from him, but I've also seen things that would concern me a little bit in terms of he seems to run out of gas in the latter halves of second halves, and his influence wanes quite alarmingly for me. So whether that's just getting up to speed with English football, he spoke about that in an interview with Dave Freezer. It might be that. But I don't think there's any midfielder I can think of, certainly the deeper line midfielders for Norwich this season, who you would honestly say, yep, absolute shoe-in, must start every week. So in that context, Lucas Rupp, you could argue, is in the same boat. But why, for me, why you would necessarily detach him and then almost focus on him as he's the root of all evil in that midfield mix, I'm not sure, really. But the question was, is he Premier League standard? Well, that's subjective, isn't it? What is Premier League standard for Norwich? It's obviously a different player than Man City or Liverpool in terms of central midfield, and again, it comes down to the type of players they can attract realistically, financially, footballing wise. I think it's safe to say that, he probably isn't good enough for what they're trying to do longer term, mid to longer term. But if he could play his part in bridging maybe this season and keeping them up in the division, then we've seen it already. We saw it in the summer. Goodbye Alex, goodbye Mario. Once these players, goodbye Marco. Once these players, Tom Tribal, Moritz Leitner. Once these players have served their usefulness for Farke and Webber, they will get jettisoned. There certainly won't be any misplaced loyalty. So you have to assume that because Lucas Rupp is still very much part of the plans, that they still feel he is a player who can contribute. Now that might change, as I say. We've got Matthias Norman to drop in there now. We might start to see a changing of the guard in the next few weeks. And ultimately, what this boils down to, and it's not just midfield, it's any part of that team, players coming in and making themselves indispensable. Take Brandon Williams the other day. If he maintains that level that he showed at Arsenal, you knew this isn't getting another game this season for Norwich, because he will have grabbed his opportunity and proven he can perform consistently at a level that is good enough at the Premier League. So really, the opportunity is there for all of these players, front to back, to do something similar. And until they do, then we're going to continue to talk about a Lucas Rupp or, Kenny McLean or Lys Malou, Billy Gilmore in that area of the pitch, because the consistency isn't there in their performances thus far in the early weeks of the season. So, yeah, I can understand the question. Is he Premier League grade? Maybe not. Maybe not over the mid to longer term, but he's there and he's doing a job that Farke thinks he can do at this stage. And you have to obviously, ultimately, we can talk, but it's the manager who has to make the call. And, I just think I've just got at the back of my head now that he's gone so big on Rupp today that we won't see Lucas Rupp in the 11 tomorrow. It's almost like he's laying the ground for when he comes out of the side tomorrow. And you could conceivably see certainly Norman coming in there tomorrow. So having defended him to the hilt, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we don't see him come 2:00 in that 11 tomorrow.
No, I'm with you. I think if he was a consistent starter for Norwich City in the Premier League, I think you probably would have concerns. I don't think that will be the case this season. I think in terms of the job in the squad that he has, and he's clearly well liked, that can only be a positive thing, can't it? It doesn't give you an impression of someone who's always going to kind of throw their toys out of the pram if they're not going to play. We'll hear from Daniel Farke on him in a moment. I'll just read a little bit of what he said. He said, I know Lucas Rupp is not a fan favourite, but if you asked every player, he would be the first player on the team sheet. The distance he covers, the repairs that he does on the pitch. He is LR7, not CR7, which is probably one of my favourite quotes that Daniel Farke has ever given. He does not play sexy football, but we need this type of player and we need support for them. I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, Pad, because obviously I'm not in the minds of supporters. So I don't know if this is exactly right, and I'm sure some people will disagree. But like I say, it's not my view, just a general question. But do you feel there is, because of when Lucas Rupp arrived in that January and the fact he at points played out of position on the right 2 seasons ago, Do you think there's an element still of people almost keeping that or forming an opinion and not being able to evolve it and change it, as we've kind of seen his role evolve at Norwich City? Or again, is kind of what is being thrown at him relatively justified? Because it doesn't feel like necessarily, whether you think he's good enough or not, maybe the criticism from some has moved on from maybe where it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, there might be an element. I mean, Daniel didn't do him a huge amount of favours. I think that one of them, or two of them early games was replacing Emi Buendia. Now, he's definitely even his utmost ardent supporter, even his family would say he's no Emi Buendia. So that didn't help his cause. And yeah, the versatility. I think I saw the previous post Tony put up there that he's almost the Swiss Army knife of the Norwich squad. That he's so versatile in theory that he can play a number of roles. But of course, that's saying jack of all trades, master of none, isn't it? So, yeah, his best football for Norwich is no doubt being in a more defensively minded screening role. There was the FA Cup tie against United in the Project Restart.
He was brilliant that day, wasn't he?
He was excellent. He was the top player in green and yellow for me that day. And again, I'll go back to what you said about Brandon Williams, who, funnily enough, was on the opposition that afternoon at Carrow Road. If he'd have been able to maintain those levels, we're not even having this debate, because he is an indispensable, to use the phrase Daniel referenced about Kenny McLean 2 seasons ago, he is an indispensable part of that midfield. The reality is he hasn't quite managed to maintain, or not quite, he just hasn't managed to maintain that consistency. And when he was good last season, alongside Ollie Skip, it's in the Championship. The Championship and the Premier League worlds apart in terms of quality and the demands placed on you. So, yeah, for me, there's massively unanswered questions about Lucas Rupp, but he's not the only one in his squad about are they Premier League grade over the entire piece. Fine doing it in the odd game, but can you get a season's worth of Premier League level productivity out of these players? And that's the great imponderable about a lot of this Norwich squad. Even the ones who were here 2 seasons ago, they didn't exactly prove they were good enough to stay in the Premier League. And since then, they've added a lot of players from overseas, a lot of young players from overseas. Nobody really knows the answer, and we won't find it out until, well into this season. So ultimately, Lucas Rupp has had this opportunity to stake a claim, and I don't think you would argue that anybody in that midfield has really put the marker down yet. So, the time will come pretty soon, I think, where, it might well be Lucas Rupp back more into his support role, coming on in games rather than starting games, and then this will become a bit of a redundant sort of debate, won't it? But right here, right now, he's had his opportunity, and certainly Daniel, if we take him at face value, is very happy with what he saw against Arsenal. So he must be still in his thoughts for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to last week when we were doing the team news video, and I think you made a prediction about Solis not starting, and he did start. So people do read, people can read as much into this as they like. But in a word, Pad, do you see Lucas Rupp starting tomorrow? Yes or no?
No.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's hear from Daniel Farke anyway. Here's what he had to say about Lucas Rupp and some of his other players at his press conference earlier.
It's unbelievable. Ben Gibson, if I'm honest, I work quite long in this business, but I've never worked with a centre back who is better in his build-up play. He's outstanding with his left foot. What he's doing in the dressing room, he acts like a captain, even if he's not involved anyhow. His personality is outstanding. And Grant Hanley, he was a massive rock in the last season. He was outstanding, our club captain anyhow. And he's so important for us as a game. Yeah, of course, as a centre back, when the team concedes goals, and sometimes you are involved in conceding goals. But it's important that we don't be too overcritical with them. We need them. We need these players and to lead. And Lucas Rupp is sometimes not a fan favorite. I know this. He's sometimes there are some raised eyebrows when he's in the starting lineup. But believe me, if you would ask the players and who train with him each and every day on the training pitch, he would be for more or less each and every player the first player on the team sheet. Really, the first player on the team sheet, because no other field player is that experienced like Lucas on this level. No other player covers more ground like Lucas on this level. No other player wins more possession back for us like Lucas on this level. With all respect to him, but he's perhaps not playing football that's sexy like Cristiano Ronaldo. He's LR7, not CR7 anyhow. So when I think about Timo Pukki, 29, 11, 26. These are the numbers of goals he scored in the last 3 seasons. 29, 11 on Premier League level, 26. I don't want to discuss right now if he's the best striker in the history of the football club. I leave it really with the experts and who have seen each and every strikers anyhow. But I think there's no doubt he's one of the best strikers that this club has ever seen. And this player has stick to us after relegation, and he had other opportunities because his blood is already pretty yellow.
There you go. You can watch the full clip of Daniel Farke speaking about all of that today on our YouTube channel, or you can go to PinkUn.com and read the quotes if you prefer. JDF Norton, before we get on to speaking about Teemu Pukki, has made a good point on YouTube. He says Daniel Farke has played a blinder. I would call it going full Mourinho since he delivers his rants. You guys and social media have talked about nothing else. It just takes the pressure off the players. Kind of the point I made very early on, actually, about whether he's done that and put himself in the firing line to just prevent us from talking about just how large or not the game is tomorrow. But we will come on to that later on. Pads, Teemu Pukki, he's another one that has received some criticism, although I don't think it's necessarily all directed at him. I think it's more his place within the system that Norwich City are trying to play, this 4-3-3 that they've played in the opening 4 matches. Clearly, the supply line to him, you just have to look at the numbers, has been severely restricted. Is more the question on Teemu Pukki, where does he fit into this system, rather than Teemu Pukki as a footballer for you?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously directly asked Daniel that earlier today, and is he placing different demands or asking him to do different things in general play? Because ultimately he's a striker, he's in the team to score goals. That doesn't change whatever league or whatever formation, but the reality is, and Daniel, more or less confirmed this, but we can all see it. He is asking him to do different things, play with his back to goal, link the play deeper from the goal. He isn't, as Daniel said, we can't construct a team which is about giving Teemu Pukki the type of support in terms of those, dare I say his name, Buendia-style passes threaded down through the channels for him to run through, because Norwich are obviously playing better opponents. They're seeing less of the ball, particularly in this first month against the level of opponent. So it was essentially, I think Daniel went on to say in that answer that they're trying to be a bit more pragmatic, and that means that in that shape that they're adopting to try and achieve that, Teemu Pukki will have to play a different role to the Teemu Pukki who terrorises the Championship. He feels he can adapt, but it's obviously taking a little bit of time, and it isn't just about him. It is about him and how it knits together with the 2 wider players in that 3 and then the 3 behind. And we've said already on this broadcast, the 3 behind, I think, over any 90-minute game, just haven't produced what's required. So if you've got a midfield that isn't really functioning as it needs, then that is impacting on what Teemu Pukki can offer to this team. But as Daniel said, 2 seasons ago, they went gung-ho, and ultimately they couldn't stay up because they didn't keep enough clean sheets. They wasn't easy. They were too easy to play against defensively. He's coming at it from the other way now, and he wants them to be a bit more defensively solid. You can take Man City out of the equation, maybe Liverpool as well, but certainly in Leicester and Arsenal games, they were a bit more robust without the ball defensively. And he obviously feels that over the entirety of this season, if they go with that approach, as opposed to you score 3, we'll try and score 4, they stand a better chance, certainly being competitive, and you hope being closer to staying up in the top 17, as it were. So it is quite a tall order, I think, if you're Teemu Pukki, to almost adapt your game to that degree in general play, because ultimately the Teemu Pukki we see in the Championship, I think, is playing to that guy's strengths. So he is having to sacrifice himself a little bit, and that's, I would imagine, is quite difficult for a guy who's used to scoring goals, as Daniel quoted his vital statistics there, 29, 11, 26. You can debate if he's the best ever. He's certainly one of the best. And I don't think anybody could disagree with that in terms of Norwich City strikers. So he's right up there. But I don't know. I think the jury's out on whether he can adapt to that role, because if you're asking somebody who's played one way throughout their career, and certainly their Norwich career, to then adapt quite dramatically, that is a tall order. But again, we're about to go into a series of games which A, are more winnable, but B, maybe Norwich will have a bit more of the ball, which means their creative midfield types might be able to thread that type of service through to him. Time will tell, starting tomorrow. But But to answer your question, no, I don't think it is about him per se. I think it's about his role in the system. And if Daniel is set fair on that's the way we have to go and that's the way I'm going to set this team up, then it's for Teemu to adapt. And if he doesn't adapt over a longer body of games, then as Daniel also said in that answer today, he's not undroppable. Nobody is. We saw it 2 seasons ago. Josip Drmic came in and that didn't really work, but that was crossing the Rubicon for Teemu Pukki to get dropped in a Norwich City shirt. So it happened 2 seasons ago. It can definitely happen now. So a bit like some of the other players we've discussed this evening, he will need to deliver what Daniel wants and the demands he's placing on that player. Otherwise, we will see Sargent starting a few more games. Adamida maybe is in the conversation. Maybe even Rashica if he wants to go that way, and that allows him then to play Jolis on the left-hand side. So that's what that squad makeover was about in the summer, giving Daniel more quality options. And certainly you would think the players I've listed, there is a bit more quality in terms of the depth in the forward areas. So, really interesting. But I just feel it's asking him to do something it doesn't come naturally to him, to ask a player who's always played off the shoulder and run in behind to now play with your back to goal. That's a fundamental shift for a striker. And you're asking him to do it in the Premier League against some of the best defenders in the world. So time will tell.
Yeah, and he's not really a striker, is he, that gets involved too deep in the build-up play of things. He always wants to be, as you said, on that final shoulder, looking for that bit of space in behind. I think with the exception of, I think Cantwell played him through against Liverpool, didn't he? And he had that shot that Alisson beat away. Yeah. Beyond that, we haven't really seen him get in behind, get fed really. He had the fewest touches of any Norwich player, I think, beyond Adamida last week at Arsenal. Which just goes to show how isolated he is at the moment. And maybe what's different this time is that Norwich have Josh Sargent and Adam Ida. Ida's obviously fulfilled a very selfless role for Ireland, and increasingly that's becoming interesting as you look at the way that Norwich are trying to play. And Josh Sargent, I think, has looked fairly bright in his cameo appearances, albeit maybe not quite fully fit at the moment. So we shall see. This comment from Chris Rose that kind of lends itself to the debate we're having at the moment. He says, do you think the 4-3-3 formation is restricting the players' performance and abilities to play their game? No number 10, he mentioned. And for all the talk of there not being a number 10, I remember us sat here, Paddy, 2 years ago, talking about Marco Stiepermann, talking about Andre Duda, saying that number 10 position is really problematic. They haven't been able to find a solution for it. And so Daniel Farke is now, and we were probably saying at the time, it would be good to see him line up with maybe a free in midfield. Well, now Daniel Farke's gone in that direction, and perhaps we're all going, maybe actually we should look again at that number 10. So it's really difficult. I think it's interesting that he mentioned today about looking at trying to get Norwich to press higher up the pitch, and that naturally will get more bodies around Teemu Pukki. But equally, there's probably enough mitigation at the moment, isn't there, in terms of the opposition that Norwich have played, that means for this game, when we look at it in isolation tomorrow, there's probably enough of a case to give Teemu Pukki another go over perhaps radically changing it because of simply the calibre of opposition that Norwich have played in the opening month of the season.
Absolutely, yeah. And not just tomorrow. I could see him for the foreseeable. This more favourable, I keep using that phrase, but a swing of games coming up. But for me, increasingly, what we're discussing today is kind of where my head was at. Before a ball was kicked in, they were trying to reshape the squad. It's that midfield mix. If they can, if it is to be the three, if they can find the right blend there, and it's got the Ollie Skip style sort of combative defensive instincts allied to, maybe a Leitner and a Tom Tribal control of possession and the ball, but also the physicality to be able to join, the top end of the pitch and support. If it's a Pukki and a Jolis or a Rashica or a Cantwell or a Dowell, those type of players, those three, that's the key for it all, really. That could unlock Teemu Pukki and the attacking players. That could unlock greater protection for your centre-backs, and then it isn't necessarily Gibson and Hanley as it was prior to Arsenal getting exposed and then one or two, as Daniel said earlier today, drawing a conclusion that they're just not Premier League defenders. They can't defend at this level. It can't be underestimated, I don't think, that he needs to perm. If it's going to be the three, he just needs to perm the right three and for them to knit and sooner rather than later, because, we are now 4 or 5 games into the season, as it will be tomorrow. So for me, it's really quite exciting, to feel that I mean, really, if I was going to pick the three who I think are best suited to offer those two faces to what Norwich need, the defensive and the attacking side of it, and the control, then it's got to be Gilmour, it's got to be Norman, and then maybe Lees-Malou or McLean. I think under the current sort of resource, and we haven't seen that trio together yet. So that's where there's a bit of optimism for me that I think Gilmour will be better with a Norman type player in there. I think Norwich's back line will be better with a more defensively minded, and we know he's not a like for like in terms of Norman and Skip, but I just think that might protect the back four a little bit better. And then if that allows Gilmour a bit more license to knit the play further forward, then we've seen his passing range. That's one thing you can't dispute. He has a very, very high level technical ability to pick the passes, pick progressive passes as well, break the lines. And I just think if he's freed from feeling he's got to, race back and try and track back the likes of Sadio Mane or Jamie Vardy or whatever, because he's got Norman to do that role, then we might just see a different dimension to Norwich's midfield. And of course, McLean / Lees-Malou, they ought to offer a bit more experience and that athleticism as well. They're good athletes. They can get up and down and around the pitch. So I think it all boils down to me, not just for tomorrow, but moving forward, is if Farke can get that three right, then it could be the answer to a lot of the little strands that we're discussing both tonight and on recent games. That why can't Pukki, look a bit more productive? Why are they so toothless in the final third? Why is there a bit of a disconnect between maybe the attacking players and the rest of the team? They do look a very disjointed, unbalanced team over the entire 4 games. I mean, there were signs against Leicester and Liverpool it's moving in the right direction, but still without that punch at the final third and still with a bit too much defensive vulnerability. So, yeah, really interested to see how he goes in that specific midfield area tomorrow.
And it does feel like if he can get the balance right, the blend of players right, then this could be a system, as you say there, that unlocks probably Norwich City being better going forward, but also retaining that defensive protection that they lacked 2 years ago. And essentially they had to play Tetty and McLean, didn't they? And close the door, basically. So this does feel like a more pragmatic way of doing that. And I'm thinking out loud a little bit, but if you look at the way Liverpool utilise a midfield three in a similar formation, a lot of it is just being functional and supporting whatever they're doing. If they go to attack, then the midfield with three are there to support. If they're looking to defend, vice versa. So maybe Daniel Farke has taken some inspiration from that. Interestingly, tomorrow's opposition, Watford, also have come up from the Championship, also playing a 4-3-3. So maybe there's some data analysis that, again, we won't be privy to that suggests that's maybe a formation that has a lot of joy in the Premier League. To move this on then, Daniel Farke was keen to ensure that this wasn't described as a must-win game. I'll ask you about that in a second. I'm going to broaden it out, though, for now. Norwich's next 5 home games, starting tomorrow with Watford. Then it's Brighton on the 16th of October, Leeds at the end of October, Southampton, and then Wolves, all before a trip to Newcastle on December the 1st. Also Burnley, Brentford in that spell as well as trips to Chelsea, but we won't mention that one. So as a period, how pivotal is this going to be for us to get a sense of where Norwich City are in terms of the Premier League? Because tomorrow, as an individual result, will not dictate if Norwich go down or stay up, but this period may have a major hand in doing so. So as we kind of look ahead to this chunk of fixtures, this feels like now the period where we can really judge Norwich City, doesn't it? In terms of certainly the next 5 home games, but broaden it out to those away games as well. Yeah,
I think really, between now and Christmas, I think we'll pretty much know how this may end up in terms of the final outcome. I think come through this swing of games, and you can see a steady, consistent improvement. You can see players who look like they can operate at this level. And okay, there'll be some results will be positive, some will still be negative because that's the nature of Norwich in the Premier League until they establish themselves. If they establish themselves, but if the underlying curve is positive and bending upwards, then I think they go into that Christmas period, and then the second half of the season they're only going to get stronger because there will be a belief and an inner confidence that, looking back at this period of games, that they have been able to pick up points and have been competitive more often than not. So conversely, if it goes the other way and they're listing quite badly as we sort of get into the sort of late November, early December, then you'd have to think then. Well, there'll be all sorts of questions getting asked then, I'm sure, starting with whether Farke's in charge for certain. That's no doubt about it. But if they are kind of still looking like that they're a bit of the identity really isn't there and that the players haven't really gelled as we hoped, then it's ultimately hard to construct a case if what we're basically saying is between now and sort of late November, they haven't managed to come through that period with enough points on the board to suggest that they can go in a positive direction. Then, and I think ultimately we all probably know where that's going to end up come next May. So, yeah, I mean, tomorrow's it's not a must-win in the sense of, those 3 points could be the difference between whether they stay up or whether they go down, obviously, because that would be ridiculous 5 games in. But it feels like a game they can't certainly get beat. I think if they will get beat, then all the words that he's come out with today will, I think you'll find, probably be buried under a torrent of toxic reaction because it's all very well saying that they're just beginning to sort of gel and try and integrate new players, but really, realistically, the negative downside to Watford coming here tomorrow, as I say, a team who haven't won and really not scored a goal in the last 3 league games, if they come to Carrow Road and get the result and deserve the result as well, then how do you spin that? It's very hard. So, yeah, it's more for the mood rather than the actual what it means for the league table in terms of the points on the board for me tomorrow. To get beat tomorrow is going to be very tough to try and raise it because then they have to go to Everton, who under Benitez are clearly a club who are looking upwardly mobile again. So, it's not going to get any easier the following week, is it? So, and then Liverpool, of course, in between in the League Cup, which would be a bit of a sideshow really to the main event. So for the mood rather than what it means in terms of survival, tomorrow is pretty big. Let's be honest, because to turn in a performance which doesn't hit the spot again, and then the result doesn't hit the spot again, you can only say so many things about it's a work in progress and that things are going to get better down the track. But yeah, ultimately for me, it's about setting a marker tomorrow, and if they do that, we've seen in the last 2 games, there's quite large parts of the Leicester and the Arsenal game where they were competitive and that they did show or suggest that they were able to, string a performance together over the entire 90 that would be good enough to get some points. Well, we haven't seen that so far. Tomorrow would be the perfect opportunity, wouldn't it?
It's breaking the cycle, isn't it, Pad? I mean, we've seen, I guess for Norwich fans, it's kind of a case of, well, we've seen this all before in terms of Norwich City running a lot of teams close, losing games through defensive errors and on small margins. They play teams at home at Carrow Road that realistically they should be winning. And then they probably lose that one. I think even back to the Watford game 2 years ago, that felt just as big. I think Watford arrived at Carrow Road having not won a game. They were bottom of the league, and they rocked up and won 1-0, didn't they? And you mentioned there in terms of what that did for the mood. I think it left a lot of people feeling, well, as Daniel said today, maybe it is a club that's felt sorry for itself for a little bit too long at the top flight. But that is only because we've seen it all before in terms of the way it pans out. So we've kind of spoken about this spell, this 5 games they've got now at home, starting tomorrow, 15 points up for grabs, Pad. If we're to talk about this season as what I've said there, breaking the cycle, being different, this being the season that Norwich City can stay in the Premier League, as a block of 5 games, how many points do they need to be targeting, do you think, out of those 15?
Well, I mean, I think clearly our focus is solely on Norwich and what they're doing or not doing to this point. But if you look at the bottom 6 or 7 clubs, there's not many wins amongst that whole group over these first 4 league games. It isn't just Norwich who are finding it difficult to, well, put any points on the board, but certainly put wins on the board. So for that reason, I don't see that changing this side of Christmas. I think it's going to be very much an attritional kind of slog down the bottom 8 or 9 clubs. So 15 on offer, I'd sign for 7 or 8 because at least that warrants progress from where they are now in terms of their points tally, and it suggests residually over the span of those 5 home games that they're producing a level of performance which can produce points. If any more than that, then I think they're doing very well, and maybe we can start to look with a bit more optimism. But certainly, any less than that, then the opposite is true. If you can only pick up less than 7 or 8 points from that 15, then it's hard to construct an argument that they really are going to do things a bit differently to 2 seasons ago. Obviously.
Yeah, there's the league table for you there. And as you say, Pad, if you look from essentially 14th, where Southampton are at the moment, without a win, 3 draws on the board, they go to Manchester City tomorrow. So you would say that looks relatively unlikely. And then you look all the way down to Norwich. Only Arsenal and Watford have picked up a win. Arsenal, obviously, last weekend against Norwich, and Watford on the opening day against Aston Villa. But as you said, Pad, they failed to record a win and score a single goal since then. They've lost to Spurs, Wolves, and someone else in that time whose memories escapes me at the moment. But and their side again, they're arriving at Carrow Road. There's some pressure on Xisco Muñoz, as we know. We know Watford's revolving door policy. They do shift managers out fairly quickly. They are struggling to create, and they've had probably an opening 4 fixtures which are more favourable than Norwich City. I think that's fair to say. So, with that in mind, as we begin to look ahead to maybe what sort of game we'll get tomorrow at Carrow Road, before we get onto the fans and maybe the response to what Daniel has said today, is it fair to assume we're going to get a relatively cagey affair? Daniel alluded that Watford are very difficult to break down. Norwich are obviously having issues at the moment and look quite blunt up top, look quite toothless up top. So with that in mind, are we expecting a low margin, kind of nervy affair at Carrow Road tomorrow? Or do you think Norwich can do enough to maybe get the fans off the edge of their seats?
Oh, that would be lovely. That really would be a nice afternoon at Carrow Road if that scenario panned out. But I have to feel it's probably going to be more the first one you painted, which is 2 sides who are struggling to score goals, and that will produce a very low scoring affair. And as Daniel said today, it could well be a 80th, 85th, 90th minute before they get the golden chance, he said. And if that's the case, then it is definitely going to be a premium on defensively being very good tomorrow. Because if, say, Watford get their noses in front, a little bit like that game 2 seasons ago, which would gift wrapped Emi Buendia sort of tricks on the ball in his own half 2 minutes in, and we know how that ended up. I think Delafeu ran through and did the business that night. So a game where, in contrast to the last few games, mistake-free. They cannot afford to be gifting goals to a team who are struggling themselves for goals. And if they cut the errors out, certainly the dangerous errors in dangerous parts of the pitch, then if it's a very tight game going into the sort of final quarter or whatever, you just would hope that, with that crowd up and behind them and bouncing, that could drag them over the line, and they will create that golden opportunity. But you put up 2 players. Tony's put up 2 players there. I mean, how good is that Sarr? He was excellent in the Championship game down here.
Yeah, well, I was sorry to cut across. I was going to come on to him because in both of the games, both at Vicarage Road and Carrow Road, although as Daniel said today, for that Carrow Road game, there were probably more than a few Norwich players and staff members nursing hangovers for that particular one. But that game was, in many ways, probably, and the QPR game as well, looking back, maybe the game that finished Xavi Quintilla off at Norwich in terms of ensuring they didn't activate that permanent option because of how he struggled defensively against Ismaila Sarr. And you look at what Brandon Williams did last weekend and the job he did on Nicolas Pepe, and we speak about opportunities. If he can replicate that and keep Sarr shut, then and certainly for those who've watched Terrace Talk on YouTube, we had a Watford fan on this week who essentially said if you keep Ismaila Sarr quiet and you kind of prevent him from really doing much, and Watford really struggle offensively. So if Brandon Williams can reproduce that level of performance, then and Norwich can keep him quiet, then you would imagine or hope that would certainly be enough for them to have, with some opportunities at the top end of the pitch as well, to record a positive result.
Yeah, well, it's the key matchup, really, isn't it? When you portray it in those terms. The last 2 Championship games, he was the difference. He was excellent. Boxing Day, Vicarage Road, I think he more or less made the goal, didn't he? But and then Carrow Road, he did give Quintilla a torrid evening. Uzo or no Uzo in that man's bloodstream, whatever. It would have still been a very tough affair. But I'd fancy Brandon Williams to be certainly putting in a bit of a welcome to Carrow Road tackle or 2 in the opening few skirmishes. And if he does that, let's see how Sarr responds. But Yeah, would 100% agree. You keep him subdued, then Norwich's chances of keeping Watford at bay as an attacking unit, and conversely, improving their own chances of doing something at the other end of the pitch, greatly increased. So, without overstating it, I think that could be the key battle. If Williams shades that in the manner he did against Pepe last Saturday, I just look at Watford's attacking options, and I don't really see too much else apart from that man. So, and the goals or lack of would underline that, wouldn't they? So, I'm a bit surprised though that I've seen those quotes from Cisco. It almost feels like he's under pressure as well. Maybe that's symptomatic of kind of the ownership structure there at Watford. They don't tend to give their managers huge amounts of time, do they? So if he's already feeling the heat a little bit, then it's up to Norwich to sort of increase that speculation around him come the end of this game. But I just think tomorrow, for all the reasons we're talking about, for the difficulties Norwich have already encountered this season, don't give Watford any encouragement. Certainly don't let them get their noses in front, because then it becomes a very difficult afternoon, I think.
So we've had Daniel Farke's words. What's going to be the response to that, do you think, in terms of the fans and the atmosphere tomorrow? Is this now going to be an atmosphere that Daniel Farke hopes it will be? I mean, I guess the danger is that Norwich concede a goal and it turns pretty quickly. But you would hope initially, and you can read his words there, let's create the best atmosphere Carrow Road has seen tomorrow, then we can get off the mark. I mean, that is a man who has told us all what he wants the Carrow Road crowd to be. Is he gonna get that? And how important is it for Norwich fans to remain patient as this game goes on? I suppose in many ways, similarly to what the Arsenal crowd did last weekend, where they started really brightly, maybe faded a little bit in the middle, but then really gave their team a push sort of for the final half an hour.
Yeah, it's a good shout, that. Yeah, and obviously, talking to managers under pressure, he openly admitted after the game, Arteta, he was really feeling it, and there was no sign of that in the manner his team set about Norwich. It's the age-old one, isn't it? Is it for the players through their performance levels to lift the crowd and take them on the journey, or do you need the fans to sort of create that electricity prior to the game? The players can feed off that and buy into that. So we'll find out tomorrow, won't we? But ultimately, I think the Norwich fans would have gone tomorrow knowing that this is a game they need to play their part. And ultimately, my mind goes back to that horrendous project restart era in terms of footballing context at the very least, and just those empty stands and Norwich meekly bowing out in a lot of games against a lot of opponents, where if there'd been 4,000 at Carrow Road, I'm sure it would have tipped the balance. I've got no doubt at all about that. And you hope that is the case tomorrow, that in a game where, as Daniel said, essentially it's two clubs at a very similar level in terms of what they're trying to achieve, where they've come from recently, maybe even the respective quality in their squads. The margins are so fine in terms of determining this outcome tomorrow that it could just be tipped by a very passionate home support driving their players on. And we're talking, pessimistically a little bit about if Norwich concede the first goal, but if it goes the other way and Norwich get their noses in front, crowd will be up, the players will be, infused to push on, and then it can turn into, maybe the game we've been waiting for to light the touch paper on the season. Ultimately, we hope it's that scenario. But yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about it. In a game where it is going to be a game decided on very fine margins tomorrow, I think that the home support have a huge role to play, and they'll know that. They don't need Daniel Farke to sort of tell them to bring the noise or whatever. I know there's a lot of some of the fan groups have got a series of kind of, scarf waving plans prior to the kickoff, and that's all designed with one thing in mind, to try and whip up the atmosphere to when them players emerge, that Watford know that they're a long way from home, and the Norwich lads know they've got 24,000 who've got their back.
Yeah, long time Norwich and Butley and Norwich as well, encouraging supporters to bring a scarf tomorrow, I think, and raising it in the way that they did for the Wigan away game in Daniel Farke's first championship winning season. You can remember that wall of yellow and green that they created at the DW Stadium that day. that's what they're hoping to create tomorrow at Carrow Road, with obviously all 4 stands as well. And Daniel said that he wanted to see 4 yellow walls as opposed to maybe just the one that we're used to with the flags and whatnot. Let us know your score predictions and how you see the game going tomorrow. I'm about to ask Paddy that exact question, so get yours in. We'll flash them across the screen as Paddy talks. I mean, you've kind of said you're expecting a low margin affair, but are you expecting Norwich City to come out on the right side of that? That's I guess the key question.
Well, let's go positive, Connor. Yeah, no, I mean, I could see a 1-1 if I'm brutally honest. I could see a 1-1 tomorrow. I just think it'll get to a point where there'll be a bit of deadlock, and then maybe a bit of preservation will kick in. Well, we don't want to push because not if you're Norwich, you haven't got a point on the board. And if you're Watford, you haven't had a point since the opening day. So yeah, 0-0 Liam Knights. Yeah.
2-0. There you go, Pad. You need a bit more of whatever's Peter's.
Well, no, I was just going to say. Yeah, I was just going to say no. I'm actually my official prediction on this broadcast. I'm going to go 2-1. I think I'll just hope that it is a good day at the office for all concerned, and if the GOAT gets the winner, then there you go. So 2-1. Graham's not having it.
No.
0-2. Graham was saying there.
0-2, 2-1. Barry 1-1. We can't beat an egg, which is I've never heard that used before in terms of football match, but excellent usage of that phrase. Mixed bag, I think, in terms of predictions, which is interesting.
Connor, your prediction, mate.
Oh, I was hoping to sit on the fence there. I didn't think you'd catch me. I think it will be a relatively low margin affair. I can see it being 1-0 either way, to be honest. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, I'm afraid. But I do hope, like a lot of these comments that are coming in now, 2-1 wins. Hopefully Norwich can edge it. And we're sat here tomorrow evening. Hopefully, we will be recording the podcast. Hopefully that's a positive podcast record as opposed to perhaps what we've had in the opening 4 weeks. That will make it a lot more enjoyable. As ever, PinkUn.com, the place to go for match day coverage tomorrow. Analysis, live blog, reaction, all that good stuff. We'll of course be doing the team news live from Carrow Road just before 2 p.m. So join us on whichever platform you're watching this on, and you'll find us. PinkUn.com, of course, the place to go for all of Daniel Farke's quotes from today's press conference. There's about a 20-minute video as well on our YouTube page, plus lots of extra content there to enjoy. If you've enjoyed watching this, then spread the word as well. It's always good to get back into the flow of these Friday night previews after what has been a fairly frenetic transfer window. So thank you all very much for watching. Hope to see as many of you as possible down at Carrow Road tomorrow. Do come and say hello if you see us around and about, and we will see you all again very, very soon. Thanks for watching.